A young child's life was tragically taken in 1925. The horrible incident had a large impact on the surrounding community as well as Buddy Schumacher's adoring family. What could have happened to such a nice and innocent boy? All who witnessed the aftermath of the event were disturbed by the level of violence. The authorities were hopeful that the perpetrator would be arrested, but nearly 100 years later, there are still no answers in Buddy's case. But first, I'd want to express my gratitude to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's show. Your mental health should not be taken casually. We all need support from time to time, whether we've been through something horrific or are struggling with a long-term issue. However, it is not always the easiest thing to obtain. There are frequently long delays to consult with a therapist, which isn't ideal when you're experiencing a mental health crisis. BetterHelp is one of the largest therapy services in the world, with over 25,000 qualified and experienced therapists covering a wide range of concerns. To get started, simply answer a few questions about what you want from therapy, and BetterHelp will match you with the appropriate therapist. If you feel that your therapist isn't a good fit for you, you may always switch to another one for free. Once linked to your therapist, you can communicate with them in any way you desire, whether by phone, video, or message. You can message your therapist at any moment and schedule live sessions at your leisure. BetterHelp.com/coldcasedetective is offering 10% off your first month. It's also linked in the text below, or you may scan the QR code on the screen. Let's get started on today's mysteries. On September 2, 1916, Arthur Buddy Schumacher was born. Art and Florence, his parents, were a happy and typical couple enjoying a normal life. They had moved in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, and were overjoyed with the arrival of their second child, little Buddy. Jeanette, their first child, was around 17 months older. Wauwatosa, located west of Milwaukee, was dubbed the City of Homes and described as a quiet suburb suitable for families. Buddy, now 8 years old, ate his breakfast before heading out to meet his buddies at 9 a.m. on July 24, 1925. He told his family that he was going to take the train with them to a swimming hole they liked because it was a particularly hot day and they all needed to cool off. Asking him to have fun as he approached the door. He and his companions arrived at the train station and boarded the train. They later told detectives that they were chased off by a man from a stone quarry before settling on the story that as they were about to jump from the train to reach the swimming hole, they heard a man say, "Hey, where are those kids going?" The man who had shouted had then jumped after the children. As they escaped, the boys noticed Buddy was still by the tracks, and they last saw the 8-year-old being approached by the man who'd leaped off the train after them, whom they characterized as a transient. Because Wauwatosa was primarily a transportation hub with a good railway line, many homeless people were drawn to the area, and many of them set up camps beside the tracks, looking for work and using the railways to travel and find work. However, as soon as it became known that Buddy was last seen with a transit man, the homeless population was attacked by neighbors, and investigators got tip after tip suggesting various members of the community were involved for the disappearance. Locals grew to detest the homeless men and women strewn across the neighborhood and sought ways to punish them out of fear. On July 27th, 3 days after Buddy went missing, a 10-year-old orphan led authorities to the location where he was last seen. He and his pals claimed that they had recently been tormented on multiple times by 2 middle-aged males, leading detectives to believe that these guys, who seemed to enjoy bothering young children, were involved in whatever had happened to Buddy. However, both men had now left the area and were never found, and it would be another 7 weeks before Buddy's family was relieved of the stress of not knowing what had happened to their son. Buddy's body was discovered on September 13th by a guy foraging for mushrooms. The 8-year-old was found barely 4 feet away from a well-used walkway, and the guy quickly alerted authorities. Unfortunately, the Schumachers had left town not long before the body was discovered to visit family and escape the constant media attention. As a result, it was Buddy's uncle who identified the body, which was discovered less than a mile from his home. The reports were gruesome. The 8-year-old had been mutilated and decomposed. He had been sexually assaulted, strangled, and a handkerchief was stuffed down his throat. The police turned their attention back to the transient community who set up camps near the railway tracks, now investigating a homicide. Their evidence wasn't much, but they felt that if they could find the owner of the handkerchief, they would find the perpetrator behind this horrific crime. The letter A had been embroidered in the corner of the handkerchief, and both Art and Buddy had already been ruled out as the A description of the item was circulated among the public via newspapers, and investigators hoped that someone would recognize the handkerchief and come forward to help solve the case. As the police investigation continued, they focused on one particular member of the homeless community, a man named Edward Vreeland. Detectives had noticed this individual earlier on, before Buddy's body was recovered, but they had stopped questioning him when the 8-year-old's friends were unable to positively identify him. Vreeland had been taken to a penitentiary facility after being questioned, but in the weeks following the discovery of Buddy's remains, investigators approached the young boy's pals again and requested them to look at a police lineup that included Vreeland. For detectives, this was it. This was the man behind the brutal murder of 8-year-old Buddy Schumacher. They had solved one of the 1920s most dramatic cases, so having decided that Vreeland was guilty, the police began building a case against him, gathering evidence that fit the narrative they created. Within weeks, 2 boys came forward to tell the police that Vreeland had taken them for a walk and, quote, mistreated them. Vreeland denied the accusations, and the authorities returned him to the correctional facility where he was still serving time. On September 22nd, Vreeland arranged a meeting with the lead investigators working on Buddy's case, where he admitted that he'd been kicked in the head by a horse when he was younger, and as a result, frequently suffered memory blackouts. He also claimed that it was possible that he had killed Buddy and simply couldn't remember it. Vreeland was described as a deeply religious man who slept with a Bible under his pillow, which may have prompted him to reveal this information to investigators. Adding fuel to the fire was the fact that a woman in Wauwatosa, Emma Abel, remembered washing the handkerchief later used to suffocate Buddy and returning it to Vreeland after cleaning it. Vreeland's story of memory lapses immediately leaked to the press, which published stories labeling him as nothing short of guilty. Meanwhile, over in Illinois, word of Vreeland's guilt reached his brother Charles. Charles traveled to Wisconsin and hired a local attorney to represent Vreeland, but things quickly went wrong. The handkerchief that had been used to suffocate Buddy was discovered to be missing, and investigators practically dismantled the police station looking for it, but were unable to find it. It was eventually discovered a few days later in the district attorney's safe, where it had been hidden without the knowledge of officials. When detectives discovered it, they brought in Mrs. Abel, the same woman who had recalled washing the handkerchief, and asked her to positively identify it. Mrs. Abel, much to their astonishment, stated she couldn't because she previously contacted the police with the memory of washing the garment. But now that it was in front of her, she couldn't tell if it was the one she'd returned to Vreeland or not. The fact that Buddy's friends had suddenly recanted their identifications of Vreeland exacerbated the situation. 2 of the 3 boys had previously identified Vreeland from a lineup, but having spoken with the man himself while he was in prison, they told investigators that this was not the same man they'd seen speaking with Buddy on the day of his disappearance. They claimed they were pressed by the police to point to Vreeland. Because forensic procedures were limited at the time, law enforcement had very little to go on. While they were originally confident in their suspicions of Vreeland, things gradually deteriorated. With so much of the case falling apart, authorities had no choice but to release the man, and he was returned to the correctional facility to finish his sentence for vagrancy. The press at the time labeled both of these men as, quote, morons. With no new suspects and no new evidence to go on, Buddy's case came to a halt. The local community had nothing new to offer, while the transient community had no interest in cooperating with the police, given the treatment they received from them, as well as the residents of the town. The case was subsequently forgotten by reporters and the public, leaving another tragedy unresolved. Buddy's burial, along with those of his parents, is situated in Wauwatosa Cemetery. And there you have it, the facts. Please leave a comment with your own hypotheses and speculations, and remember to like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching, stay aware, keep safe, and I'll see you next time.